The marriage was a business deal, until the rich rancher risked his fortune to keep her. The deed was sitting right there on the table, corner of it curling up where the wax seal had cracked. I remember looking at it for a long time that morning, longer than I needed to. The lamp was still burning. I'd been up since before the sky went gray, and the ink on that paper had been dry for 6 weeks. Her name was on it, Elena Vasquez, and mine. And between those two names in the careful script of a Tucson notary was a sum of money, 320 acres of the lower valley, water rights to Coyote Creek, and the date the whole thing was to take effect. April the 14th, 1881. 6 weeks of marriage, and I still didn't know what to do with her. You want to understand how a man like me ends up signing his name to a piece of paper like that? I'll tell you. Won't take long. My father built the Crab Ranch from nothing, sand and sweat and 40 years of sleeping with one eye open. He left it to me when I was 23 and already knew more about cattle and water and boundary fences than most men learn in a lifetime. I ran it hard for 12 years, doubled the acreage, put in the south well, the winter barn, the bunkhouse with the real chimney, ran the best shorthorn herd in the county and didn't owe a cent to anyone living. I was 35, and I had everything my father wanted for me. And I had nobody to eat dinner with. That sounds small, I know it does. But you live enough years in a big quiet house and eat enough meals with nothing but the sound of a fork against tin, and it starts to wear on you in a place you can't quite find to press on. I had hands who respected me. I had a foreman, Ches Morales, who'd been with me 8 years and knew what I was thinking before I said it. I had the respect of the valley, such as it was. But the house was empty in a way that had nothing to do with furniture. I won't pretend I went about it the right way. Hector Vasquez came to me in March. He ran the Rafter V south of my line, same family, same ground going on 30 years. But Hector had let things slide. I knew it. The whole valley knew it. He'd borrowed from a land company out of El Paso, a bad outfit, the kind that writes a loan designed to be called early, and they'd called it. He had 60 days to produce the balance or hand over the south pasture and the water access it sat on. If that south pasture went to that company, my herd lost half its summer grazing access. That's the plain version. He came to me hat in hand, which wasn't easy for him. Hector Vasquez was a proud man, and everybody knew that too. He laid it out straight. He needed $18,000 in 60 days or he was done. And he had a daughter, 26, unmarried. And he said, I can still hear exactly how he said it, quiet, facing the window instead of me. He said, she is not a payment crab, but she is a good woman. And you are a man who ought not to be alone. I said I'd think on it. I thought on it for 4 days. Then I rode down to the Rafter V and met her. Elena Vasquez was standing in the kitchen yard throwing feed to a scatter of hens when I rode in. She didn't come out to meet me, and she didn't stop what she was doing when she heard my horse. She finished the bucket first. Then she turned around. She was not what I expected. I don't know what I expected. She was dark-eyed, medium height, and she looked at me the way you look at a horse you're considering buying, not unkind but measuring, taking stock. You're Crab, she said. Yes. You want to marry me to save my father's land. I appreciated that she said it plain. I said that's one part of it. She looked at me for a long moment. A hen came and pecked at her boot toe and she didn't look down. What's the other part? I'm tired of eating alone. She almost smiled. I could tell she was deciding against it. She looked out past me at the yard, at the fence line, at whatever she was thinking about. Then she looked back at me and said, I'll need my own room until I decide what I think of you. I said that was fair. We signed the papers 3 weeks later. Here is what I thought I was getting, a practical arrangement. A woman in the house, someone at the other end of the table. Maybe in time something more if she decided she wanted that, and so did I. I had told myself that was enough. That a man my age, A man with land and cattle and no particular softness left in him. That was the right way to think about it. What I actually got was a great deal harder to manage than I'd bargained for. She came into my house with 2 trunks and a wooden crate she wouldn't let any of the hands touch. She carried it herself from the wagon into the spare room I'd given her, and I found out later it was full of books. Not the Bible and not the domestic almanac, history books, a Spanish grammar, a volume of Mexican land law from 1848, a translated copy of something by a French engineer, maps folded up inside. I didn't ask about them, but I noticed. She learned the house in a week. Not the way you learn a room you're living in, the way you learn a machine you're responsible for. She talked to my cook, Dora, for 2 hours the first afternoon, sitting at the kitchen table, and after that she knew where everything was, what we were running low on and which suppliers Dora trusted. She walked the full property in 4 days, the south pastures, the creek line, the winter barn, and she didn't ask me to take her. She asked Ches. I didn't know how to feel about that. I found out later she'd told Ches she didn't want to ask me questions in front of the men until she understood enough not to ask dumb ones. That was the first thing she did that I kept thinking about afterward. The way she thought about how things looked to other people, not for vanity, for standing. She understood that I had standing in that valley and she wasn't going to do anything that chipped at it. It was 3 weeks before she sat with me in the evenings. I'd gotten in the habit of sitting on the front porch after supper, just the one lamp going inside, letting it get dark, not really doing anything, thinking mostly. One evening I heard the screen door and she came out and sat in the other chair, the one that had been there for years but that nobody ever used, and she didn't say anything, just sat down with a cup of coffee, and we watched the last of the light go. After a while she said, "You lost cattle this spring." "Some. Before you paid for my father's loan." "Yes." She was quiet. "Then you should have told him you couldn't." "I could, I had the money." "You know what I mean." I didn't know what she meant. She meant I'd stretched to do it. Not dangerously, but it showed in the books, and she'd found the books and she'd read them and she'd figured it out. I said, it was a fair price for what I got out of it. The grazing rights, among other things. She looked at me then in the last of the light and I couldn't quite read it. She said, "You are a strange man, Crab," and then she went inside. I sat out there another hour. She ate at my table, slept down the hall, managed the household with a calm competence that I came to rely on faster than I wanted to admit. She started keeping a ledger of domestic expenses and cross-referencing it with Dora's lists. And 2 months in, she'd reduced our dry goods spend by 20% by switching suppliers in Tucson. She just told me about it one morning at breakfast, quietly, like it was nothing. Slid a page of figures across the table. I looked at the numbers. I said, "How'd you get Mornos to come down?" I told them we were considering Harlan Brothers. Were we? No, but they didn't know that. I looked up at her. She was eating eggs and not looking back, but the corner of her mouth was doing something. I went back to the figures. The truth is, I hadn't expected to like her. I'd expected to respect her, maybe, to get along with her, but you don't expect to look forward to breakfast. You don't expect to find yourself listening, through 2 closed doors at night, for the sound of a lamp going out down the hall, because until that sound comes, you know someone else is awake in the house, and the house feels different. I didn't say any of that. She had her own troubles, and I learned about them slowly. Her mother had died when she was 14. She'd run the Rafter V household from that point on, not as a girl playing at it, but actually run it, because Hector Vasquez was a capable man with cattle and a near-useless one with anything domestic. She'd done the accounts, managed the cook, dealt with the suppliers, kept the hands fed, all of it from 14 onward. She told me this not as complaint but as fact, the way you describe weather. We were riding the south fence line in October, and she was pointing out a section that needed restringing, and I said, "You know fences?" And she said, I know the Rafter V fence line because I watched it go unmended for 3 years and I couldn't afford the wire. And then she told me about the household, just matter of fact, while we rode. I thought about that for a long time afterward. A 14-year-old girl learning to run a ranch because there was nobody else to do it. All those years of work and no one to hand it off to at the end of the day. She never asked me to feel sorry for her. That made me feel it more. November 1st, hard frost. I came in late from a down-fence situation in the north pasture, half frozen, and she was still up. The kitchen was warm and there was food on the stove, and she brought a plate to the table without asking whether I wanted it. I sat down and ate, and she sat across from me with her coffee. I said, "You didn't have to wait up." She said, "I know." And that was it. But there was something in those two words that I turned over in my head all the way to sleep that night. She knew she didn't have to. She'd done it because she chose to. That distinction had started to matter to me. Our rooms were still separate. I hadn't pushed it. Hadn't wanted to, which surprised me more than anything. What I wanted by November was something harder to name. I wanted her to decide on her own. I wanted whatever she chose to be real and not obligated. I was afraid she'd choose obligation anyway. That she'd come to me because she felt she owed it, and I'd never know the difference. So I kept my distance and I waited. December brought the trouble. A man named Garrett Prine rode into the valley. Land agent for a combine out of San Francisco, though he had a local face on him and knew how to work a room. He'd been buying up debt in the county for 6 months, not land directly, but debt instruments, mortgages, short-term notes, anything he could get, and then he'd ride up to the ranch in question and offer a buyout at 50 cents on the dollar. If you took it, you walked. If you didn't, he had lawyers. He called on me on a Tuesday morning. Sat in my parlor with his hat on his knee and a smile that had practiced itself in a lot of mirrors, and told me that his employer had an interest in the Crab Ranch, specifically the water rights and the access corridor to the Southern Valley. He said he was prepared to make a very reasonable offer. I told him the Crab Ranch wasn't for sale. He said that was fine, just fine, and then he mentioned, almost as an aside, that he also held the note on the Rafter V improvement loan, the secondary one, not the one I'd settled, and that he'd been looking at the dates, and it appeared old Hector Vasquez might have signed something he shouldn't have, back in '78, that could cast some question on certain of the property boundaries. Just something his lawyers had noticed. He wasn't suggesting anything, of course. He left. I sat in that room for a while after his horse left the yard. I knew what he was doing. He couldn't touch the Rafter V directly, not anymore, because I'd taken care of the main note. But he'd found something else to pull on, and if he could prove a boundary irregularity, even a manufactured one, with the right county judge in his pocket, he could move the survey line. If the survey line moved, the water access moved with it, and if the water access moved, I had a problem. But Alina had a bigger one. If her father's land shrank if those boundaries moved, the Rafter V wasn't viable. Hector was 61 years old and his health wasn't good. If the ranch went, he went with it. I didn't tell her that night. I needed to think first. She found out anyway. I don't know how. She had a way of hearing things I didn't understand. She had friends in town I hadn't accounted for, women who knew things, the wife of the county recorder's clerk being one of them. 3 days after Prine's visit, she came into my office without knocking and put a piece of paper on my desk. "He's filed a survey challenge," she said. I picked it up, official county header, Prine's lawyer's name on it. "I know," I said. "You know?" She looked at me for a moment, not angry, figuring. "How long have you known?" 3 days. "And you didn't tell me." "I was working it through." She sat down across from me, uninvited, and put her hands flat on the desk. "Then work it through out loud." Something in me relaxed a little at that. I leaned back. Told her the whole thing, Prine's visit, what he'd said about the 1878 document, what I thought he was actually after, what he'd try to do with the survey challenge if it went through. She listened without interrupting. When I was done, she said, "What's the 1878 document?" "I don't know yet. I have a man looking." "I might know," she said. I waited. My father signed a grazing agreement in 1878 with a man named Talbot for use of a strip of land along the west edge. Talbot's gone now, sold off years ago. But the agreement had a clause in it about boundary acknowledgement. It might read like my father was accepting a different boundary than the official survey. If Prine's lawyers worded a challenge around it correctly, it could create enough doubt for a friendly judge to order a new survey. Yes. I looked at her. How do you know about the Talbot agreement? I found it in my father's records, years ago. It worried me then. I put it in the back of a drawer and hoped no one would ever look. She said it evenly, just a fact, something she'd carried a long time. I said, "I'm going to fight it." She didn't say anything. I said, "Not because of the water rights. I want you to understand that." She looked at me then and something shifted in her face. Not soft exactly, more like a door opening a crack. She said, "I know." I don't know why those two words hit me the way they did. The same words she'd said that November night. I know. But they meant something different this time. This time they meant she saw me. What followed was the hardest 2 months I'd had since the year after my father died. I spent the first week in Tucson with a lawyer named Halloran who was honest and expensive and good. He looked at the Talbot agreement, looked at the original survey records, and told me we had a reasonable case, but it was going to come down to who was in the judge's pocket. The county judge was Fletcher Briggs, who I'd always found tolerable and who I'd never had cause to worry about. Halloran told me quietly that Prine's group had been known to do its socializing with certain judges in other counties. We didn't know about Briggs. We'd have to find out. I spent money I'd rather not have spent. I hired a second lawyer in Santa Fe who knew the land law better than anyone in the territory. I had the original survey retraced by a licensed surveyor out of Phoenix who had no county connections. I found the man who had sold Talbot's original holdings and got a sworn statement about what Talbot himself had understood the Rafter V boundary to be. And through all of it, Elena worked. She was the one who found Talbot's buyer, a man named Fitch, living in New Mexico, whom she tracked through a chain of property transfers she mapped out from the county records herself. She rode to Tucson twice on her own, without telling me first, and came back both times with papers I hadn't known to look for. She found a surveyor's note from 1874, 7 years before the Talbot agreement, that put the Rafter V West boundary precisely where we said it was. I didn't ask her to do any of it. She just did it, the same way she'd done everything else, quietly, efficiently, without making a show of it. One evening, late February, I found her at the kitchen table at midnight with a lamp and a spread of county records, making a timeline on a large sheet of paper. She didn't look up when I came in. I made coffee and set a cup at her elbow and stood reading over her shoulder. She put everything in order. Every document, every date, every recorded transfer, the whole chain of events that would show a judge exactly why the 1878 agreement couldn't change the boundary, because the boundary had already been established by survey and acknowledged by both parties' predecessors. It was clean and it was airtight, and it was some of the clearest legal thinking I'd ever seen laid out on paper, and she wasn't a lawyer. I said, "Where'd you learn to do this?" She kept writing, "The Mexican land law books. You read those?" "I've had 12 years of worrying about my father's land. Yes, I read them." I looked at the top of her head, at the lamplight on her hair, and I felt something that I'd been keeping at arm's length for months come up all at once, and I had to look away. I said, "Elena." She stopped writing. I said, I don't want you to think that the only reason I stopped, started over. When this is done, whatever you want, if you want to go back to your father's, if you want to stay and have it be what it's been. I'm not, there's no, I ran out of words, which didn't happen to me often. She turned and looked at me, lamplight on half her face, the other half in shadow. Is that what you think I'm worried about? She said. I don't know what you're worried about. I'm worried about winning this case, she said. That's what I'm worried about. We can talk about the rest after. I said, all right. She went back to her paper. After a minute she said, without looking up, pour yourself some of that coffee and sit down. I want you to look at the 1874 document again. I sat down. We won. Not clean, nothing's ever clean. Briggs turned out to be honest enough, which surprised us both. The Santa Fe lawyer presented the case in court in early March, and Prine's lawyers pushed back hard on the Talbot agreement, but the 1874 survey note was the piece they couldn't answer. The surveyor we'd hired testified. Fitch's sworn statement came in from New Mexico. After 2 days of argument, Briggs ruled the challenge without merit. Prine left the county within the month. His combine went on to trouble other places, and there was nothing we could do about that, but he left ours alone. I rode out to the Rafter V with the news myself. Hector Vasquez was sitting on his porch in the afternoon sun, thinner than he'd been, and when I told him, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "My daughter did this. She did most of it." He nodded. He didn't say much else. But when I stood up to leave, he put out his hand and I shook it, and the way he did it, the pressure of it, the steadiness, was the most he could have said. March thawed into April, a year since the papers. I don't know exactly when things shifted between Alina and me. I think it happened the same way that fence line rust happens, not all at once, but you check it one day, and it's further along than you thought. I knew something had changed by the way she laughed one evening at dinner at something Ches said, a real laugh, and then caught my eye across the table. Or the way she'd started leaving a book on the parlor table, just there, open to wherever she'd left off, the way you do when you're comfortable in a place. Small things. The residue of a year of the same house, the same lamp at night, the same coffee in the morning. One evening in April, a warm one, almost a year to the day from when she'd first arrived, we were out on the porch again. The lamplit evenings had become ours in a way that hadn't been declared, just settled, the way all the best things between people settle. I don't remember what we'd been talking about, something about the south pasture. Then we were quiet. She said, "I've been thinking." I said, About the other part," she said, "of what you said when we met, that you were tired of eating alone." I didn't say anything. She turned to look at me. "Are you still tired of it?" I looked at her. The question she was asking wasn't about meals, and we both knew it. I said no. "Because of the arrangement?" "No." She held my eyes. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." She looked out at the yard for a moment. Then she reached over and put her hand on mine where it lay on the arm of the chair. She didn't lace her fingers through mine or make a production of it. Just covered my hand with hers steady and let it sit there. I turned my hand over. We stayed like that while the dark came in from the edges of the valley and the first stars came out above the ridge. The cattle were quiet in the lower pasture. Somewhere down the road, a door on the bunkhouse banged in the evening wind. I'd built everything I had to build and never once thought it would feel like this. Like enough. She moved her things from the spare room in May. I won't pretend everything got easy after that. Marriage isn't easy, but what I'd wanted for more years than I'd admitted was this exact thing. A woman in the room with me, with her own will and her own strength, who'd chosen to be there. Not obligated to be there. Choosing. She kept the ledgers. I let her, not because I needed her to, but because she liked it and she was good at it, and you don't argue with something like that. She rode out with me some mornings, not every morning, but on the ones where there was a reason. She went to her father's every 2 weeks, and I'd go with her sometimes, and sometimes she'd go alone. Hector lived another 4 years. He died in the house he'd built, and the land stayed what it was. I've been at this ranch going on 30 years now, and you can stand anywhere on it, by the south well, in the winter barn, at the creek line where the cottonwoods have got bigger than they were, and there's not a thing on it that doesn't have her in it somewhere. Not because she built it. She didn't build it, but she helped me keep it. More than that. She looked at what I'd built, at what I was, at the man I'd spent 30 years becoming, and she stayed. You get to a certain age and that's what you want. Not to be saved, not to be flattered, just to have someone look at you plain with all of it on the table and stay. The lamp goes out down the hall and the house is quiet and the valley is dark, and the papers on my desk have both our names on them. That's the whole of it.